And I believe I'm live. Hi, everyone. This is For the Love of Comics. A very warm welcome to our first live stream of the year. This is the first live stream of 2023, which is actually quite surprising to me. I thought I was very on top of the YouTube game, and I've been very regular, and that's good as far as videos are concerned. I didn't realize that I haven't had a live stream in a while, and I'm just glad to finally fix that. And honestly, that's what I wanted to do today. Is I just wanted to have a live stream because it's been so long, and I had to manufacture a reason. I'm glad to see people in the chat. Comic Crack, very good to see you. Welcome. Ashwita is in the chat moderating, as much moderation as these things ever require, as I say. She might go to bed pretty soon because it is getting late over here, but glad to have her as long as she's with us. Edward, good to see you. Yes, happy first live stream of the year. Thank you. Thank you very much for being over here. Comic Crack, beautiful lamp. Thank you. Yes, I decided to try something a little different, branching out into practical lights within the shot, in my cinematography journey. Thank you. I hope, I had a live stream. Actually, I did have a live stream, but it was a self-destructing live stream. So it was only live. The recording didn't come out on the channel. I didn't really advertise it. And that's where I was playing with lights and mainly lights, but microphone setup and things like that, and chatting with people about what looks good where. And this is sort of where we arrived upon workshopping it in a live stream. And I made a couple of tweaks to that. But yes, so first live stream of the year, slightly different setup with some changes. And I'm also trying out, for those of you who are interested in the technical things, I'm also trying out a low profile, sort of lightweight live stream, trying to keep the headphones and the microphones to a minimum. But I do like monitoring myself. So I do have headphones on and I do have a microphone. It's just lower profile and right out of the shot. Although I just want it, I just want it closer. This is, I like, sorry about that. Yes, I'm going to stop fiddling with these things. Good morning, Gore Vidal. Super laugh hard. Hello. Happy New Year. Happy New Year to anyone I haven't said Happy New Year to in the comments of the videos published so far. Elder Wood, Paulo Costa, good to see you. Gore Vidal, Comic Binge, excellent. So many people over here. Stoked to read it and more live streams, says the Comic Binge. Yes, this is, so I've been talking about technical stuff, but what is the live stream ostensibly about? As I said, I wanted to manufacture a reason to have that. And I recently, very recently, read Pulp by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips, the latest book. Well, not the latest now, because they've got the Reckless books coming out, but I hadn't read Pulp, and I think it came out 2 years ago, and it won the Eisner for Best Graphic Novel, the single volume graphic novel award that they have. But I only got around to reading it in this, and let me just quickly test if this is working. How's that? Is the angle all right? Is the focus on there? I have this on manual focus, so because I don't want, I had that. Okay, so that's out of focus. I think that should be good. You can let me know in the chat. Cutting the blue light off the back bookcase with a set of flags. Ah, Comic Crack, thank you. Yes, I'm going to talk cinematography with you offline. Although it is a process live stream, as we'll get to, if I can stop getting distracted by different things. So if the focus is good, happy Sunday, happy Mother's Day. If it's Mother's Day, happy Mother's Day wherever you are. Thank you, Lars. We've also got Nalin, or is it N. Allen, the Pew? I can never tell in the comments how that's pronounced, so you can clarify that for me. But anyway, checking on the focus of this, if the focus, contrast, everything is good. So this is the process edition of Pulp. And those of you who are familiar with Pulp and have read it can tell that Pulp is a lot shorter than what the page extent of this book is. And the process edition is a special edition of this. It's oversized over the I think the original size is a little smaller than this. So this is a larger format hardcover of Pulp with the process in it. And if I can just give you a bit of a comparison as far as the the story is concerned, just to show you what the proportions are of this book. And I don't know if it'll show up at this camera angle, but I'm hoping that it will. So let's see. Here we go. That is the finished book. So it comes at the end of this book. There's all those pages. That is pulp. So here you see you've got the afterword. This is the story. And this is the rest of the process edition. So to give you an idea of what this volume comprises, if you bought Pulp, if you've read Pulp before, this is what it is. This is what this is what the rest of the book is. So that's what comprises, that's what makes up all those pages. So I read Pulp for the first time in this edition. And as I showed, the entire story is part of this book. It's in complete inked, colored. The final volume, the final look, just slightly oversized from what it was before. But the draw of this edition is obviously that process part of it, this process. And once I read this, and I'll talk a little bit about what I thought of Pulp, and I'd like to know what other people thought of Pulp, but also, I don't want to have any spoilers because, again, there are some people here who haven't read it. So I didn't really want to talk about Pulp and most of my reviews aren't heavy on spoilers anyway. So I'm going to avoid all spoilers. And I'm not even sure if I want to talk about what I thought of Pulp, because that wasn't what I was thinking this live stream was going to be about. But I enjoyed it. I liked it. And I would say that I liked it quite a lot. There were parts of it that I was less enamored by than others, but I thought it was an interesting setup. I thought it was well executed. I thought it was tiny, just a slightly bit overwritten or overheatedly written in parts, which I think sometimes is the point with Ed Brubaker, especially when he's writing his pulp crime stuff, which is a lot of it. So I can understand that perhaps it's not only, but the rest of the writing, apart from a couple of things that stood out to me, was terrific. The art was fantastic, but the story, it really worked for me. It really appealed to me. There's a middle part of the story. Again, I don't know how to talk about this without spoilers, but there's one part of the story in the middle or about, I don't know, 4/5 of the way through that I didn't quite like, but I liked what came before it and I liked the way it ended. So overall, it was an enjoyable read for me. It was also dense in the way that Brubaker and Phillips books sometimes are. And my favorite works of theirs aren't just the lean noir story that they're showing. It's the things they're hinting at, the things they're insinuating, things that may be in the backdrop, but things that are being echoed because they're being echoed by what the characters are doing. So this might be, I haven't read The Fade Out, but this is like the settings that they create, the Hollywood setting, the setting of Criminal, and how Fatal is more close to horror, sleeper, science fiction. These are the kind of things that enable them to comment on a number of things. In Pulp, it happened to be about writers and writing, but somewhere I think you can also read it as a comic book writer thinking about their career in comic books and the industry. So while not at all explicit, looking at pulp writing at a certain point of time and an aging man writing stories, I think some of those echoes are inevitable or pretty expected for some people, and I think it enhances the story. So those aspects of the story I absolutely loved. But the reason I have it up here today is because this process edition, and I'll talk about this particular edition and what it contains in more detail, made me think about process editions, because there is something over here where they said, well, we wanted to publish this because I don't think something like this has been done before. And I immediately started thinking, well, has it? Has it never been done before? What exactly do they mean by this? Because I think for many of us, particularly the experienced comics readers and collectors in the audience here, I think a lot of this will be familiar to us. And that was really the impetus behind this live stream, as a discussion on what are the extras that we see in comic books in particular editions? What do I mean by extras? How do they refer to process? And just to try to figure out, if I can, for no reason other than the excuse to talk about comics with like minded folk, to try to figure out a label or a kind of edition, or maybe the process edition is a good way of putting it. Although, especially given the proportions of the material that I just showed, how much is the book and how much is the extra material, that may not always be uh, possible. It may not always be logical, and it may not always apply to all stories in the same way. So I thought that in a rambling way, we could talk about various editions and forms, various types of books that we have read or encountered or know of that give us insight into the process of making a particular story. And this is, the first of the distinctions that I will have. Rest assured, I have a number of distinctions. Whether I can remember, I don't have any notes, so whether I can remember them all or not is a different matter. But I've been thinking about a different, labeling system, categorization system, what should qualify, what should not qualify for what term. And I don't think anyone who knows me on this channel will be surprised by that. But I thought that there is also something that we can do together in a group. And how would I proceed? Let me try to first of all get to explaining what I was thinking about and seeing what people have suggested. But I'm just going to quickly go through the comments. Gore Vidal says he's listening while organizing Daredevil comics. That's great. Organizing comics is simultaneously a painful and pleasurable thing. I know some people for whom it's purely relaxation, it's purely pleasurable. For me, there is a larger anguish at the back of my mind, I think, because I don't plan it well enough. I don't say I'm going to only do my Daredevil comics, for example. I think that's the sensible way to approach it. Finally joined the live stream. Happy to have you. Abdullushi, I do not, unfortunately, know what it is you're typing because I cannot read. I cannot read your language, unfortunately. I don't think there's a translate button on here, is there? No. Off My Shelves says all my videos are low profile. Off My Shelves, glad to have you. Least amount of equipment as possible. Pulp is my third favorite Brubaker Phillips book after Kill or Be Killed and Cruel Summer. Ooh, interesting. I knew about Kill or Be Killed, of course, because of your videos. Cruel Summer is an interesting book to put at your number two. These two, Brubaker and Phillips, have made a number of great works, many of which I haven't read, unfortunately. TA, hello, good to see you. Hello from Chicago. Nalan the Pew, like Winnie the Pooh. Thank you. Nalan the Pew. I'll remember that now. Pulp is one of their best, in my opinion, says Comic Crack. Had no idea. Well, I'm glad I can inform you about this version, and you can stick around and see if this is of interest to you. Although spoiler alert, I get the impression that it might be. Pranab Sharkar, good to see you. Sanmaniac says, I like when extra features include variant covers and additional art material. Okay, excellent, excellent. We're getting started with this already, but I need a drink of water. Edward is listening while chatting and working on his latest comic page. Excellent. Great to know. I'm very surprised by the idea that this live stream can be background listening. I'm very flattered, but I always think that it's too fractured, too staccato. I never complete my sentences. I don't understand how it can possibly be that kind of soothing, droning background noise. Or maybe you can just tune it out and have volume. Super Laugh Hard says Judge Dredd the magazine is the only monthly comic I know to include articles, insights, and extras. Interesting. So, as a monthly comic, it comes with these extras. And Sean Phillips worked on it before he met Brubaker, so maybe it was an influence on him. Interesting. I mean, I think that's possible, but then are we saying that there are other Brubaker and Phillips process editions out there? Because as an edition, and also from their notes, I got the impression that they've not done one something like this before. But obviously, extras are something that we are familiar with. It is something, and this is what I want to talk about: is like, what kind of extras do we know? What kind of extras are we? I don't think I've known all the variations there are out there. And what I've got out here are selections more for convenience and because they were at hand and because I have them. They're in no means, no way representative of the best way of doing it or the most authoritative or the first one. This is not in any, there are no superlatives here except for the personal. However, a couple of them I think I can safely argue are terrific. In my limited experience. And I also asked people on the YouTube community page as well as on Instagram. I asked them, and on Facebook, I think, I asked them what their favorite copies or editions would be that would have given them insight into the process of creating that work. So here's my first distinction. Here's my first cutoff or disqualification. I am not talking about works that are about the process of comics in general. There are many excellent works, of course, out there, but I'm talking about specific works, the process of certain works. So they have to be oriented to a book or a title. So they can't be things like understanding comics or things about the vocabulary of comics, things about sequential art in general. So while we're talking about process editions and process comics, we are not talking about the general process. We're talking about the specific process linked to a work that we can identify or is being identified. So that's rule number one as far as what it is that we're talking about. Hello, Lord. I need to put my glasses on. I always try to avoid having my glasses on because of the glare that lights will. Lord Tatman, thank you. Hi, all. Hello. Extras tend to be scripts, covers, pencils, and interviews, but I wouldn't say that works together to tell the full process of scripts is popular. Excellent point. This is another point that I have, which is the full process. Can it ever actually be captured? Can it be captured within the kind of edition that we're talking about? Or will there always be certain things that are either too ephemeral or honestly too uninteresting, that they don't have the zing that we want to associate? And in many ways, visual and art processes, as well as transitions from script to page, are things that are extremely easy to understand. They're very accessible. So it makes sense that those would be the things put across, because now you're not really getting into the nitty gritty of what's inside a writer's head or what's inside an artist's vision and how they're working on things without becoming perhaps too specific, too like too much inside baseball, where maybe as an artist you will appeal to artists who want to know how to do this or how to avoid the mistakes that you've made or how to get better at a particular thing. But to a general comics reading audience, that might be too niche or it might be too esoteric. So there will definitely be popularity based on accessibility and interest. And that's another interesting question. Like, what interests me? What interests you? Are you interested only in the art stuff? Are you interested only in the writing stuff? Are you interested in how particular people work together? So, for example, how do Brubaker and Phillips work together? People who've collaborated on dozens of books and look to be collaborating till for the rest of their lives, as they say in interviews and in works like this. How is the relationship between twin brothers Ba and Moon working on a book, and how obviously different it would be than two people who've never met each other and just work over mail? These could be various things that are appealing to some people and not appealing to others. So which type of process are we looking for? And what is the complete process? I think that's the important question, is that we're never going to be able to get the full process. But why? What does the full process actually entail and include? And can we somehow glean that from these books that we read? let's see that Miracle Man Omnibus came with a ton of good extras. All right. These omnibus and collected editions is one thing that obviously we'll see as a pattern. I don't make a habit, Paulo Costa says, of buying special editions with backstage materials, but I sure don't mind having them. Yes. And now this is another question I have. And this was the larger question I have is, do good things come to those who wait? As the cliche goes, I wanted to pick up Pulp when it first came out, and everybody who talked about it raved about it. So and I'm familiar with the creators and I'm a fan of them. So there was no reason for me not to pick it up, except something or the other got in the way. And then I also had this idea that I think it'll come out in a library edition because of the work. Now, I know that sometimes their work becomes very hard to find, and sometimes it isn't collected, and then there's a lot of well, I'm not very well connected, but people I know tell me that that's never going to be collected. They've said it's never going to be collected. It's only going to be in this form. And that obviously works to the FOMO aspect of it, but there is a perverse part of me that immediately wants to resist that. If someone says this is a one-time, limited-time offer of something, I'm just like, all right, I don't want to. I don't want to be forced into it from that point of view. I often am. I'm just saying that's still a reaction I have. But if you think that something's going to come out in a library edition, if you know something's going to come out in an omnibus edition, and you prefer those editions, and different people have different preferences, there is the aspect of waiting for one of those things to come out in a form that will give you both the work and the extra and the backstage material, or something else, an oversized presentation, a hardcover, all of the variant covers, etc. Something the trade paperback didn't have. And that's actually the same with trade paperbacks. For a lot of us, like for me here in India, buying the single issues just never enters the picture. We don't have that machinery, we don't have that environment. I mean, I guess you could do it digitally, but trades have always been the way to buy comics, or I would say the major way to buy comics in the modern era. I'm not talking about my childhood here. So that's already a form of waiting, one that you do because you don't have any choice. But you may have a view that something else will come along, some other thing will come along. And for some reason, I felt the given the popularity and the acclaim and the awards that Pulp won, I felt that there would be a larger edition. There would be a something closer to the library editions of Criminal and Fatal, etc., that I have. And I like those larger editions, and they usually don't end up being that much of a price difference, at least by my evaluations. So I didn't have any idea about the extras, but usually a larger edition might have some more extras. It becomes a more deluxe or a sort of gourmet item. So I had a vague notion that might be the case. And so I held off on buying it primarily because of format. I don't have any problems with the fact that it was a slim story. I love slim hardcovers. Those who know my channel and know me know that I love slim hardcovers. I love that album, European type of idea of one story in one volume, thin, readable. So that wasn't an issue. And again, I don't have to have everything large. It is just that Brubaker and Phillips, I know that there are library editions. So it was that hope that there would be a library edition, something a little larger in size, that I didn't buy Pulp when it first came out. So when this came out, and friend of the channel, Arindam, pointed out that, all right, I think this is what you've been waiting for. And I was like, hold on, but is it just extra stuff? And he's like, no, the full, final, finished story is in it. That's when I was like, yes, this is what this is better than I could have hoped. So that is my next caveat, is I want to talk about books that have the original story in them. There are many books that are about other books or about other stories, and they will often have great detail into the process and whatever we call the process. But these are I look upon these as academic works. And of course, a lot of the writing and things within the other editions that we're talking about can also be academic works, of course. But I think about them as being about another text. So this is the primary text, and this is the secondary text on that, even if it is about the process. But I would like the primary text along with that secondary text, if that makes any sense. So that's what I wanted to do, and that's why there are some books that people talked about that are fantastic books on other books and other stories, but don't contain that story in itself. And so therefore that's not what I'm talking about either. That's why I'm sticking with the word extra, although especially when you look at something like this and the story is this and that's that, it seems a little off to call that extra. And especially for an edition called the Process Edition, surely the main purpose of this is to give you this bonus material, to give you this behind the scenes material. So to even call it bonus or to call it extra seems incorrect, because this is not the purpose of the story. Of course, you get the full story, so that's why it's getting a little complicated. So if it's not extra, then what is it? But it is extra because I also have the full story in there. So that's about where I've gotten to with my first two caveats, tying myself in knots. The history sections of the Eternaut and Moth Cinder releases were really enjoyable. Yes, and this is something again interesting. The context. So when we talk about extras, the extras can be of of any different type that's related to the story. And one of the things that someone mentioned was Tintin, and there are, for example, I had some Tintin books over here. I, of course, I wouldn't. Something like this, the Complete Companion, which is just a book about the influences of Tintin, what they were based on. There are photographs, there are replications from the comic, but this is, in spite of all of the artwork and images, this still is an illustration prose combination. And it isn't so much, even though it'll definitely talk about what Hergé was doing, it'll talk about it from a historical perspective, from a contextual perspective, and link it to the comic. This is, of course, an external text, so this doesn't have any Tintin story in itself. And then one of the things that I found, and Tintin is also available in these little miniaturized formats, and I'm not a big fan of them. These are only for research purposes, but the font is too small and thin, and the art is too, in spite of the handsome hardcover and all of that other stuff, I don't like these mini editions. The one exception I liked are these editions, and this one is from, I think it's Little Brown. I'm not sure. I think it's Egmont, but it's a particular, yes, it is Egmont. But this edition, which is paperback, and like say this hardcover is 3-in-1, this is just a single adventure. And that single adventure, yes, is a miniaturized one. But what I like about it is that it has this little section in the back called the Real Life Inspiration. Now, this is obviously for children. This is like a young reader's edition. So this is a little bit of, oh, you had a little comic adventure. Now get some general knowledge and get some knowledge about the world and history. And, it's kind of like giving you your healthy stuff. Here's the real story behind the shooting star. But this is specific to the shooting star, and other editions of other adventures would be specific to that adventure. There might be some things in common, but here's something about observatories. So what we have is, here's something about telescopes, here's newspaper articles, and then there's stuff from the comic itself. Now, what I like about this is that this is providing a larger context. It might be educational and getting children to understand about astronomy and stars and comets and things like that, things that are adjacent to the story, but it is still related to the shooting star. However, I wouldn't call this or those other works process works. They're not about the writing and the drawing of it per se. The one exception would be inspiration, because I think, and to off my shelf's point earlier, the complete process is a huge thing, and where it starts, we know where it ends when something gets published and distributed, but where it starts is hard to define. So inspiration probably is a very important part of the process, and where the inspiration came from, what ideas came first, what was added onto it, what was referred to, what was researched, what was referenced. These become, even if they're not directly connected to something you see on paper, these become an important part of the process. So what I like about those editions is that they give that inspiration aspect of it. Something that we'll see is part of the more regular process pages that we've seen in Marvel, DC, Image, Vertigo, etc. comics. Is MetaMouse a similar example? Yes, MetaMouse is absolutely a great example. Another example, and some that were pointed out by people, is Dave Gibbons's Watching the Watchmen. So you have the annotated Watchmen, and then you've got Watching the Watchmen. But annotated Watchmen contains the whole Watchmen story. Now, it doesn't contain it in color, so it might be closer to Watchmen Noir, but it does have the entire Watchmen story, and then the annotations are around it. Watching the Watchmen doesn't, but it's all about how Watchmen was created. MetaMouse similarly will have extracts, but it doesn't contain the entire mouse story. So I'm not counting it, although they are obviously significant and impressive and famous works of process illumination. All right, so what are we talking about next? Is that I do have some comments that people had shared. Now, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to pull this off, but I'm going to give it a try. Where did my images go? Well, there we go. Let's try this now. Let me know if this doesn't work, but I've got a comment over here on my screen. And this is a larger comment, but right in the beginning, Edward, who's in the chat over here, said, well, in general, usually concept art and stuff at the back of the books is the bonus content I look forward to. And then he talks a little bit about black and white editions of Earthworm Jim, but the main thing is that, yes, we all know, like in trade paperbacks, in collected editions, we get variant covers, we get artwork, we get other covers, but we also get sketches, we get character sketches, we get initial sketches. So those are all part of the process somewhere. They're telling us where something started from or what the early stages of things were. Someone mentioned Batman Year One and the Absolute Edition. But the interesting thing is, even the trade paperback, I don't know if this has always been the case in the trade paperback that I read, but when I got to the end of the TPB, I had a whole bunch of extras. And this included, afterwards, a special comic done by Mazzucchelli. We've got sketches. We've got artwork and covers. This is where I learned that Bruce Wayne in Year One was modeled on Gregory Peck, something that seemed fairly obvious to me afterward, but had never crossed my mind. Now, you also have some sample pages and the pencils or the roughs of those pages being translated over here. There's 4 at a time, and this is something that would be gloriously blown up in and expanded upon in the Absolute Edition. But even this trade paperback comes with a whole, I consider this a treasure of comparing what is written and how it's sketched out, and the fact that it is included with the story means you can go to the page that you're looking at and see the final version. So it uses the before and the after and the primary text being part of the process, as in ending the process. So you read the story, and when you're reading this, you can go back to the story, and that becomes the punctuation for the so-called extras, something that I really, really love. Yeah, so covers, coloring, color, what is this called? It's not layers. You can see, obviously, I'm not a professional, but how the compositions are put together, as well as trivia and information. And here's something that was created for the hardcover. Here's something that was created for the first edition, things like that. Now, I've talked about year one in detail in my absolute year one video. The I did bring out the absolute just in case. Well, first of all, I was like, oh, I'm not going to pull out all the absolutes. I'll just tell people, go watch that video. But that's not the point of the live stream. So the absolute editions, I think the most attractive thing is the reproduction in the original colors. Now, whether that's not really a process thing, so but as a reason to pick up this edition, I think it's right up there. But it does also, not in this, I always forget, oh, it is in this one. It does contain the entire script and the entire pencils laid out again in this way for the whole comic, which is an amazing thing to have. You get this 4 pages at a time, and you can compare it to the pages. And this is the entire book reproduced with the entire book, and you're sort of getting this X-ray, ultrasound, MRI, whatever you want to call it, into the transition from writing to the page. But really, for us, it's working backwards. This is what we see first, and then we realize what it comes from, and why I think this is, for me, so appealing, but also I'm guessing for everyone else, is it really gets you to appreciate the sort of alchemy that's happening. This is not this, and this is not this either. It's something else. By putting all of these things together, who's translating what in which way, and how much of it was there in, so the writer's eye, and how much the artist brought to it. I think those kind of conversations, just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to things like this. So I think there's like no doubt why year one is such a is such a favorite of people. Having that entire script with the entire page layout, roughs, pencils is an astonishing thing to have. Now, I did say, and someone directed by William Wyler. Wait, I talked about Audrey Hepburn makes me think of Selena Kyle. Okay, Gore Vidal's talking about Gregory Peck in Batman. Yes, I think Audrey Hepburn as Selena Kyle. Yeah, I think that definitely interesting. It could work. I'm not 100% sure. Um, the Absolute Year One was the first time I could comfortably read the journal entries in the comic. Joined up writing in comics always slows me down. That's interesting. I did know some other people who complain about whenever comics writing isn't in all caps or isn't in block letters. Some people even don't like it when it's a combination of uppercase and lowercase. Forget joined up letters, and I think I understand that. I understand that with joined up letters more than uppercase, lowercase. I think I've grown up reading a mixture of comics, and I think when I was very young, I read 2 or 3 comics that had this joined up writing, and I kind of pored over them, and it must have been harder for me at that time, but because I read them so often, I think I kind of got used to it. But I understand what you mean, because it's almost as if the writing is going too close to being writing, and isn't comics writing enough, where writing in comics, the letters on the page always seem to be closer to art than to prose writing and definitely handwriting. But yeah, especially for journals, for diary entries, things like that, letters. Back in the day, you had to use handwriting in comics to show that difference. Yeah, I'm just trying to see if there's anything I have. Yeah, reading cursive, reading joined up letters, often a problem. But it wasn't just year one. I mean, it wasn't just the absolute edition, but it was the fact that it's also in the trade paperbacks that I think works superbly. In fact, my wife used to teach in a school, and she taught Batman year one, and her kids, the kids in her class really loved the process pages at the back of the trade paperback because they were reading the trade paperback. And she made a homework assignment out of that, in which they first wrote a script and then illustrated a page by themselves. So that's literal proof that you can learn, or at least get started learning about comics, by just picking up a comic which has extras in it and seeing how it's done, and following it up, I guess, with practice and reading more comics and things like that. Um, let's see, what other comments did I have? I had one. Um, so that was, yes, and it was about the absolute edition, because yes, so Arindam Sen said that New Frontiers extras could be a TPB in itself. And it's also one of the only books that he's read that has extras that delve into adaptation. And that's specific to New Frontier, and what it's adapting. That also reminded me of my when I think about the ones that I got an idea of extras and how deep or how much they could tell me about the process, it was definitely Absolute Editions. Year one came much later. So for me, it was Absolute Sandman. And Absolute Sandman is back up there. I thought I would get it down, but that was a little too hard to get because I've put it in a second layer and there's stuff in front of it. So I do have a video on the Absolute Sandman, and I do talk about it there. But the Absolute Sandman had that first pitch, the pitch of what the series is going to be, that Neil Gaiman handed in. And this took it to another level, because now I'm seeing the formulation of, not inspiration perhaps, but the proposal being put forward. And that's a part of comics that I knew nothing about. I didn't know anything about people pitching and people putting proposals together, and I hadn't seen anything like that. So for me, seeing that crystallize the process, like, before there is a script, before there are pencils and all of these other things, before anything happens, there's a pitch. Of course, that's in a particular publishing system, but having that as part of the extras, then getting into the character sketches and things like that, that was phenomenal. And very close after the Absolute Sandman, I got the Absolute Watchmen, which really which multiplied that. Now, of course, I've talked about Absolute Watchmen again, but I did want to bring it out to see if I could find. I hope the focus stays. This is a little thicker and higher up. So at the end of Absolute Watchmen, you've got some fantastic extras, a number of them, including the proposal or the pitch, the original synopses, if I'm remembering correctly, which paired with the Absolute Sandman, for me, was just mind altering. Where I'm seeing this fantastic comic. I'm a big fan of Watchmen, in case you didn't know. And then, of course, you've got the character sketches, and it's interesting to see how different or how similar people looked. But it was the text accompanying that, describing who these people are, that fleshed out nature of these characters, and how full and complete in some ways they were in the writer's mind from the very beginning. There are some significant changes, but not that many. And the fact that all of this was put together before anything was written, as far as what we consider a script, shows us how early that process begins and how comprehensive and how complete it would need to be. Of course, and I think I said this in that one as well. To me, my favorite part of Absolute Watchmen is the script, again, of the first issue. But this is an Alan Moore script. So each panel, that's panel one, that's panel two. This is the writing that ends up being, and once again, you can flip to the very beginning and see what the reference is to. So you can go page by page, panel by panel, well, for the first issue at least, using this. And then you've got the highlights by the artist Dave Gibbons, and they're highlighting in different colors the things that they want to watch out for and they want to make sure that they've paid attention to. And once again, you can see that being translated into the images. So as part of that process part of it, from the character sketches and the build up to the detail of how a writer can determine the look of a panel, again, significantly mind altering for me. And so between Absolute Sandman and Absolute Watchmen, it became clear to me that Absolute editions were the thing to get. Of course, the oversized nature and the quality of the paper, the silk ribbon, all of these things are great allures. But it reminded me of when DVDs first came out. So I'm old enough that VHS and VHS tapes and collecting those, my favorite movies on VHS, was a thing that I was doing in college. And it was unsatisfactory because VHS movies tended to be pan and scan, so they didn't give you the full picture. And if you found a widescreen version, people would complain about having black stripes at the top and bottom of the screen. It was a dark, dark age. But when DVDs came out, they not only gave every movie in its proper widescreen aspect ratio, but they also had DVD extras. They had interviews and they had little mini documentaries, and they had a director's commentary or an actor's commentary that you could play over the movie. Now, I never quite made my peace with like someone talking while the movie is playing, but I got its allure. But the fact is, it was all extra on top of the movie, which is the thing that you wanted to own. And so the Absolute editions really felt to me like that. They were the Criterion edition of the comic books because of that kind of insight into the creative process, into the history of it, but also how it formed, and of course very curated in order to have a particular image. But that's all books. And that's where the fascination with the Absolute editions began, which, as we all know, is a deep, deep, dark hole. So when I look at comments that talk about Batman Year One, Absolute Year One, New Frontier, yeah, absolutely, I get it. So the third qualification that I will do, and actually before I do that, give me just 1 second. It seems unfair to have given a little bit of screen time to both Batman Year One and Watchmen in their absolute forms that I have talked about on this channel before, and I've never talked about New Frontier, which is a terrific Darwin Cook comic, but the absolute edition of it, I don't remember my trade paperbacks. I had 2 volumes. I had volume 1, volume 2 of the trade paperback. I lent them to a friend, well, not really a friend anymore, someone at the office who never returned them. And then he quit, and I never got those 2 trades back. So to console myself, I bought the Absolute edition. Although it was many, many, many years later, because this is, I think, the second printing of it. The first edition was sold out, and I had to wait. But I knew I liked this comic enough, and I was able to find the singles, etc. But that's not the point. The point is, I don't remember if the trade paperback had all of these. Just the way that Batman Year One's trade paperback has some, but not all the extras. I believe that, or maybe there's a new edition or a deluxe edition that actually replicates all of these extras, which would be great. Then get it. If you don't have it already, get it in any version. If they give, I mean, well, get it even if you don't get the extras. But the extras over here, and what Arindam was talking about, include the references to the Silver Age chronology and how the story was put together using the existing DC canon chronology, and the way the heroes and villains appear in this story mirror. And now I'm nowhere near a DC history expert, so I'm going to go by what this says and what others say. But this is one of the things that a lot of comic fans were kind of blown away by. Something that doesn't make a difference if you don't know about. Like, for example, if I didn't know about it, someone points it out to me later, I'm like, huh, okay, that's interesting. But the level of research and the thoroughness, and it's a show of love. But then again, you've got the book over here, so then you can see what that amounted to. And I think that's an interesting thing that someone brought up in one of the comments. They said, let me see if I can find that comment actually. Talking about, all right, so we've got In the Gutter looking out saying, it may not be special, but it stood out to me personally as interesting because I didn't like the comic itself. The deluxe edition of Seven to Eternity has page-to-page script and art comparisons. I haven't read Seven to Eternity either, so I'm not. But I think what the interesting thing about it is the extras can be good even if the comic wasn't good. You can enjoy the process part of it even if you didn't enjoy the finished product, which is cool, which is interesting. It's understanding and appreciating expertise and thought and consideration and craft, and an end product being something you enjoy or not has to do with a number of different things. And it's not always that I don't like something. When I don't like something, it's not always that I didn't like it because I thought it was poorly crafted. Now, there are certainly those things that I have read that are poorly crafted, and that's the reason I don't like them. But then there are many other reasons. But appreciating the craft, even when you don't appreciate the story, I think is this layer that these kind of extras or these kind of insights, these kind of process pages give us, is understand the hard work, understand the thought, understand the depth and the imagination. And then you can either judge the work differently, or even if your judgment of the work remains the same, you still have respect for the process, which I think is a fantastic thing. So I just realized I forgot to turn on a light for my overhead camera. That's terrible. So that's been on pretty high ISO all this time. And now, of course, I can't find the button. Oh, no. Never mind. I just messed this up. Oh, here we go. Let's see. Is that better? Should be less grain. Of course, there's a little bit of a glare because of the light up there. But yes, so what was I talking about? I distracted myself. Yes, so The New Frontier, continuing in the tradition of the Absolute editions, is an excellent Absolute edition. I don't know if these extras are there in the other editions, although I believe that they are. And now therefore, I'll come to the third caveat, or the third rule is, all right, we know Absolute editions are great. Let's leave Absolute editions out of it. They are maybe the epitome in some ways, and I'd love to know if they're not. I'd love to know if there's other editions out there that put together the full, complete, finished, final, original work with the extras, glimpse into the process, and the extras would also be non-process extras. So for example, variant covers that we talked about, these are extras, these are bonuses you're getting to the story. You're getting things that were in other issues. You might get promotional material. You might get a poster that was designed for a book launch in Paris, things like that. But they're not really process pages. They're not informing, or they're not about clarifying how the work that you just read, or in the case of Pulp, the one you will read, how they came to be. So is there something better than the absolute edition for that specific thing of collecting the work together, as well as as well as the illumination of its process? Right. So now I saw someone mention an Alex Ross art book and concept art over there. And Alex Ross is another person I did think of, because I remember it must have been for Kingdom Come, but it could have maybe been for Marvels, or maybe it's for both. But I remember the trades, not even the absolutes, the trades being the same way as the year one, the Batman year one trade I showed, where you had pages at the end that showed Alex Ross's process and photo reference and lighting, and it was very cool because you would see, and I think it's there in Astro City as well, or maybe I'm just putting them all together. But it's the kind of thing where you'll see a friend of his dressed up in a bed sheet, and then he will create that image out of it because he's got the way the light falls on the folds of the cloth and things like that. So yeah, I think in an art book, because it isn't about that particular story, or it's not including the particular story, I wouldn't count the art book, but definitely those pages at the end of trade paperbacks. So along with absolute editions, what I love it is when deluxe editions, trade paperbacks get these extras as well, these process parts of it, which, as we have seen, tend to be, here's some covers and pinups. Sometimes you may have a cover gallery. Sometimes you may have contributors giving finished artwork, but the process part of it tends to be sketches, concept sketches, character designs, early character designs, and how that character design evolved, and transitions from script to page. So you might have a script extract, and then the pencils or the roughs. So these are the kind of categories that we've seen so far. Is there anything I'm missing? Is there anything I've forgotten of anything of what we've talked so far about? Highland G, good to see you here. I'm just, yes. So I think I'm up on the chat. I'll scroll back down. Highland G, good to see you. Highland G says, I skip most extras until it's something I really care about. I rarely look at scripts, but I love to see sketches and final art process. Right. So okay, you missed maybe the beginning of the thing. Is like, yeah, I was saying I think different people will have different things that they're interested in. Some people will not be interested in the script. Some people will not be interested in the concept sketches, maybe. But what so I think you're saying that you're not interested in any extras, and I think that's fine. And I think there is something to be said about wanting only the story and wanting to not be colored by anything at all. It's like, I want to like or dislike the story on its own terms. And if you give me a whole bunch of extras that show me how much hard work went into making something that I really didn't enjoy, I'm going to feel very bad. Talking trash about it. So I don't want anything altering my judgment. It doesn't matter what you intended. It doesn't matter where, which volcano you sourced this charcoal from. It only matters what you ended up with. And I can kind of understand that, to have that sort of purist attachment to it. So I think then in some cases it might be like, here's a special edition of something that you've really liked, so you already have it in some form, and now get it in this form so it has all these extras. Or if you decided to take a chance on this book, you will be rewarded by having some more insight into it. That's one way of looking at it. Or I think you could be more cynical and say, well, it's a way of padding out volumes, and well, you only have 4 issues, and now you're going to put a couple of extras in there, so you're going to get to something that you can charge $19 for or $15 for. So I'm not subscribing to any of these things. I'm just saying there's all of these different ways and probably many more of looking at why are publishers putting in there. Are these, is it purely altruistic? Is it purely for sharing? Or is it trying to, you know how good this work is? Or is it padding things out? Do most people like them? I mean, Highland G, I think you're saying that you don't care for them. And someone else had mentioned earlier as well, that I don't go out and seek these. If they're there, then it's great, but I'm not going to buy an edition particularly because it has those extras. Whereas for other people, that might be exactly what tips the scales. And it's like, yes, I'm going to get that edition because it has that, or I'm going to wait until something comes along that has this and this and this, and I want that. Or is that all like that kind of Kickstarter dressing? Like, okay, I got a pin and I got a patch and I got this and I got that and I got the book, but how good is the book? And did you somehow hide it by having all of this paraphernalia and all of this celebration around it? Yeah. Which way would we go? Um, Lars Gunderson says, for some reason, I've never gotten New Frontier. I've read it and have the animated version. Oh, you've never gotten like got what the big deal is? I can understand it. I guess. I mean, it's just so pretty though, and it's such a great adventure. But I don't know anything about the Silver Age. I don't know anything about DC chronology. I don't know what these Easter eggs are and what these references are. And I think it worked for me in spite of me not knowing all of those things, which I think says something about how good it was. I'm sure it must have been very, very pleasurable for. A couple of live streams ago, I was talking about Afterlife with Archie. So I can understand it, Afterlife with Archie. When I know so much about Archie, I understand where that appeal of that comes. But I also think it stands alone on its own, and that's the way I look at New Frontier. At least, yeah, at least the last time I read it, I thought it still held up for me. Um, Streaming versus physical media. I must have missed some conversation over here. Um, one shouldn't knock the use of volcano charcoal. Indeed, I just it's not going to make the story better. Extras can also be viewed as a way to get fans to double dip. That's what I was thinking about. It's just like who is the audience for this? Someone who already has bought into it, or someone who has already literally bought that product, maybe in singles, maybe in a trade paperback. Am I going to get to a new audience with this? And maybe that is, it's possible. Maybe like with my wife's class, maybe someone just having any book would learn something from it. So maybe they wouldn't pick up a book if it was just a comic, but if it was a comic and then they've got how this comic was made, maybe they would pick it up just because they wanted to learn that or learn a bit more about that. I mean, people pick up model CV writing, cover letter kind of tips and things like that. So even if you just want to plagiarize, even if you want to just follow that format as at the starting, maybe it could be that way. But I have often thought that, yes, of course, this is for the diehard fan. This is for the person who's already sold on it. Or it could be a way for someone who's been hearing a lot of buzz about something finally get to dip their toes into it because they're picking up something substantial. I don't really know. Yes, Nalan, Super Laugh Hard was was making a reference to my rather weak joke. New Frontier is a great epic sweep to it, Sleepy Reader says. I think I agree. And I just love that kind of retro art style. I'm a big fan of Darwin Cook's artwork, but it feels nice and old fashioned and modern at the same time. Um, Elderwood says Marvel and DC try to find new ways to sell readers the same stories. Yes, that's the sort of their job. Like they just have to repackage and repackage and repackage. Um, we shouldn't buy it if we don't want them to do it. It's a tough, tough topic when I'm going to be like, well, on this edition as opposed to that edition, extras entice people to buy the same books again. Sure, or as I was talking about with Pulp, and here I am as in my example, is I never bought Pulp. I bought Pulp now because of the process edition. And that's been the case, I think, for a couple of different things. Although I will agree that in most cases it's a double dip. I think for me, um, Usagi Yojimbo has been double dipped on a couple of times. But there's a difference between buying things because you like different editions. Because I like a hardcover, I want to see something that is done in a different layout. I like to see black and white editions as opposed to color editions. Those are things that I like. But there have been some things, and I'm thinking particularly of Astro City, for example, that just I buy the trades and the trades come with the extras. There's no double dip involved because I wasn't buying the singles, and that's what I really like. I that's why I like. That's why I don't think I want to talk about absolute editions because we all understand that they're great, but they're being put together as a package, as a commemorative, celebratory thing. So it's like, that Doctor Strangelove is a great movie. Now I'm going to give you Doctor Strangelove with all these documentaries and these interviews and these things and behind the scenes shooting, etc. And it is obviously for fans of Doctor Strangelove. So just in the way that Criterion Edition DVD or Blu-ray is for someone who has seen that movie and who may own that movie in some form or the other, although ownership versus access is, a different thing altogether. Yeah, I think it is for, but I don't know if it's, yes, I think it can be a little bit of milking, but I also think that that's kind of what fans want, and that's kind of what collectors or scholars are also looking for. They want something that has been remastered. They want something that has behind the scenes, or maybe not. And I think that's why there are 2 or 3 different editions. As if you want that, you get that. If you don't want that, get this other book. I think somewhere people like me automatically assume that when someone reads a trade paperback and likes it, they are obviously going to go and buy the hardcover or the absolute, which is not necessarily true. I can give someone or recommend Day Tripper to someone, they can absolutely love it and they can have it on their shelves right next to their bed and read it every year for the rest of their lives and never buy the deluxe or the absolute or something like that. That never crosses their mind. So I think somewhere we may have a limited view of thinking everyone is like us, is that if you like it, buy the hardcover. If you like it, buy the absolute. It's like, why? I can read the trade paperback and love it and read something else and buy something else. I don't have to upgrade because I don't necessarily consider it an upgrade if what I love was the story. Apropos of something. Hello from Italy. Good to see you here. Extras, I'm fine with spoiling the magic. That's an interesting thing. The spoiling the magic. Do we want to know how the food that we like is prepared? Do we want to know what goes on behind the scenes? So, does it spoil the magic? Is a very good question. First of all, magic is trickery. And I think, I'm just trying to be literal here. But yes, I think it's craft. So I don't think if it's illusion and if the idea is to keep things from people, then yes, you have the final product. And if you believe that the final product is to hide things and you don't want to see the things that an artist has decided to hide, yeah, absolutely. I get it. There are these ideas that I forget, maybe it's Yeats or when talking about a line taking us hours, maybe it doesn't matter unless it seems like it was a moment's thought. So otherwise all your stitching and unstitching has been for naught. So the idea is that you constantly stitch and restitch in order to make the seams disappear. That's what an artist wants to do. And so therefore showing the stitches is not the point. But I think over there, what you're doing is you're hiding the seams from the final product. And then the process page is how do you hide a seam or what lies beneath that seam that was hidden, which I think is a little different than showing the stitches. I don't know if this analogy has been stretched to this is ridiculous breaking limits, but I think there's a difference between ineptitude and the ability or the inability to hide the strings when hiding the strings is the point of storytelling. And I think wanting to know how something was put together is okay if you don't want to be mystical about it. And this is where I think I'm always in two minds, because I love literature and I love art and I love comics and great storytelling, etc. But I also think that they're over mysticalized by people, where they think that great stories just like come down from the heavens and strike this writer who is then filled with genius and just spills it out on the page and draws in a frenzy for 48 hours until, without even knowing what he's doing, he has created a masterpiece. That's just not the way it works. I mean, people work at it, they plug away at it, they practice, they get things wrong, and they do it over and over again. And yes, they do get into a zone, they do get a shorthand, they do develop muscle memory, all of these things that make it more and more effortless seeming. But I think seeming effortless and being effortless are two completely different things. Being effortless is like, it's not hard work, and that's like some sort of natural talent or spiritual power, whereas seeming effortless is craft, is ability to make something look easy. And that, I think, is the difference between those two things. So that's where I fall on that magic line. I mean, it is magic, but it's magic because of the talent of the sleight of hand. Actually, I had a professor once who was talking to someone about writing, and he said, "Well, if you want to write, you can write in two different ways. You can choose to be a magician who makes their living hiding things from their audience, or you can be a stand-up comedian who makes their living by giving things away." And it's a cool way to put it, but it always struck me as in, yeah, there are different kinds of storytelling, and they come from different places. So the subterfuge storytelling is what we end up thinking about as cheating. When they cheat at the end, or when they, like in Misery, where they didn't get out of the car. You can't cheat. You can't just have them appear over there. You can't just not explain these things, because you're trying to be shifty. Whereas if you're trying to perform by being generous, by giving things away, I think the process pages are proof of that. They're proof of the craft and the work behind something. And it's proof that it's not just magical talent and it's not just, it didn't just appear. Although there are various things to be said about how we look at that. I really have to love a book to want to double or triple dip, Comic Crack says. Yeah, well, I mean, I think I'm getting to the point where I would think many books should have one definitive edition, and I will decide which one that is, and all the other editions cannot exist. But that's just ridiculous. What I like to double dip about is when it's markedly different. And where I get a different reading experience. So if I read 55 single issues of Bone, that's very different for me than reading 9 volumes, which chapterized with their arcs in a particular way, which is very different from reading it in a 1-volume edition in black and white. Those, even if I know the story, those are 3 different things. But anyway, I'm getting distracted. Gore Vidal says Casablanca, a beautiful film, yet its production was a mess, which makes the final product even more interesting. And this is another interesting thing, is that when we hear about behind the scenes stories when it comes to film and movies and things like that, we hear this kind of Hearts of Darkness, Apocalypse Now, warts and all, kind of like this was a disaster and this was over budget and then the shark wasn't working, and we see the story of triumph of overcoming this. The comics extras that we look at are never that way, I mean, usually not. They are, and this is why I think this speaks to the comment about publishers wanting to milk money, is it a true behind the scenes? Is it a true, addressal of all the complications and the problems and the second guessing that was there? Or is it a curated view in order to create a certain impression? I think it's a question worth asking. One of the things that did come up in the comments was the From Hell companion. Now, obviously, as we've been talking about, this automatically gets disqualified because this is a book about a book. This does not contain the original story in itself. But many would say, like Watching the Watchmen by Dave Gibbons. Many would say this is one of the most definitive works on a single work. Because of the depth of its annotations, you can understand, and particularly coming from an artist's point of view, which we have in the form of concept sketches and covers and things like that, but not very rarely, but it's rare that you will have an artist write at length about their process and what they were thinking and how they wanted to approach it. You do see it in interviews, and I guess sometimes you could say, well, an artist isn't there to write, and that's why you won't see much from them, and I guess that makes sense. But page by page, chapter by chapter, this is perhaps one of the most incredible works of insight into a work. So even though it doesn't qualify for our parameters over here, the From Hell Companion definitely comes to mind as something beyond just your concept sketches and layouts and script transitions. This is a true insight into the thinking process and the research process and the way that it is put together by Eddie Campbell and Alan Moore. But this is not, it doesn't count. So we're putting it away. But it's worth mentioning because From Hell is a great book. It's probably my favorite Alan Moore comic. I've said that before. I keep wanting to make an Alan Moore top 10. I just want to check the focus on this. 1 second. Is that good? Yep. All right. So yeah, I will make a top 10 Alan Moore video soon, my personal top 10 Alan Moore, but I think I've already given away the entire list in various videos. But the reason I bring up, not just because of the From Hell Companion, but From Hell, the book itself, is it ends the last chapter. After that, you've got these annotations that were part of the original publication that came out, this appendix. And this appendix is Alan Moore writing again about this book on a page by page, often a panel by panel basis. Now, most of these annotations are historical footnotes, but if you take the time to read this now, historical footnotes on something that is already this size does seem daunting to people. And there are a fair number of people who I'll be sympathetic with who say, I want to read comics, not prose, and that's fine. But once you've read that comic, if you braved these appendices, this is some of the most exciting and gripping writing about one's own writing that I have ever read in my life. The insight that it provides into not just the research and the historical facts, but how Alan Moore's brain works or was working when he wrote this, of why he put this together with that and how that seemed like a good idea, the wit, the humor, the panache that he has with language, the self-deprecation, and often hidden as bombast. It's incredible. This, if you're familiar with Alan Moore's writing about his own writing, this is probably the champagne or the cream of it, and it's included in the book From Hell in all versions, I believe. The hardcover, the paperback, the master edition. I think these annotations, that appendix, is there in every single thing. And because it's part of it, and because it's extra and alongside it, it qualifies. So if you take From Hell and the From Hell Companion, you could just spend a month or more just going over that one book with all these notes and have 2 or 3 different kinds of experiences. Oh, Ashwita is still here. I thought you might have. Fallen asleep. She says, "I think I learned a lot from comics process pages about how to write illustration briefs for picture books." That's right. So she writes children's picture books, and the way she works and communicates with her illustrators, I've often found to be, I'm like, oh, this. I'm listening at her door. She's like, oh, this sounds like the way comics people must talk to each other. but yeah, that's good to know. The process pages sort of connect that idea that you don't want it just to be here's the writing and here's the art. That's not what it is. It's like what is going to be written and what is going to be drawn and what's going to come after that. All of that put together is the storytelling. So rather than just repeat the text in illustrated form, how to have the text and the illustration work with each other, that's the real trick of comics, and I'm sure illustrated books as well. So people are talking about the platinum edition, but I think I must have missed what platinum edition we're talking about. Um, Lars Gunnison says, I bought the single issues and gave up reading the appendix. Yeah, yeah. And if you don't read the appendices, that's fine. The story is still what it is. It's just maybe because it was so unexpected, because when I finished reading From Hell, I saw the appendices and the appendix, and I was just like, well, all right, I'm going to give one or two of them a shot. So I started reading it and I was flipping back to the first page just because I wanted to keep referencing it. And before I knew it, I was like, halfway through that and I was like, I did not realize that an appendix to From Hell would be this exciting. And then the From Hell companion, sort of takes that in different directions, but again, as I said, put together some of the most insightful commentary on a work while accompanying that work. So a little different from those kind of page script pilot, even the proposals that we saw. So Neil Gaiman had a proposal. We had, oh, speaking of proposals, I've got the other one that I had, and this is just a personal thing because I think this was the case for almost all books after a while in trade paperbacks. You would get at least a couple of concept sketches, you would get at least a couple of early drafts. Maybe you would get a page of script, all of which I liked. But when reading Ex Machina, I found, and this is true of the deluxe editions, but I believe this is true of the trade paperbacks as well, is that each volume ends with extras, but the extras are also chronological in the way that, so for example, you've got a note from the, let me check. So you've got a note from the editor over here, and here you've got a proposal. So here's the proposal that Brian K. Vaughan has for Ex Machina, and this is the first deluxe. So the first deluxe has the proposal, has the setup of it, and the characters. So the introduction to the characters, the write-up about the characters, again, these things that exist long before the comic does. Essential, basic character sketches, but basically the background and the history, and then what the stories are going to be. And that's all. That's just like 3 pages of this. But these extras are continued in the next volume. So, So in volume 2, you now start getting extras about the art. So first you had the proposal, then you had the character sketches, then you've got the first briefs, then you've got the script, then you've got the pages. And similar to, I think Tony Harris and someone else I've seen do this, and it's not in the first 2 volumes, but show their photo reference. So we talked about Alex Ross, in which you can see that, but I've seen that with Tony Harris and I've seen that with Brent Anderson in the Astro City volumes, is where they'll show you that photograph and then they'll show you the panel sketch that they made and then the final panel next to it to show, even when looking at something like photo reference, what the photo reference is for and how much the artist is still bringing to the image. And so when you look at the photo, you're like, that does not look like a cape, or that's just silly. And then he's just crouched like this, and then there's a lamp shining on him, and then you see the confessor, on top of a gargoyle in a gothic cityscape. And you're like, that beautiful piece came from that silly little pose because it was all about the light and shadow. So I really love those as well, because I think somewhere in the back of my mind, or maybe even the front of my mind, I thought that photo reference, oh, that's not artistry. You should draw everything from yourself. You should not have any reference, which is a silly and naive thing. And I think seeing those kind of pages and seeing the kind of creativity and the reasons why that photo reference is being used for narrative purposes, for furthering the story, for getting the right mood, for getting the right expression, for getting the right thing. It's the kind of dissolving of magic that I'm fine with, because it seems so much in service of storytelling, and that's something that I really admire. So for me, reading Ex Machina in the trades and again getting the little bit of extra in chronological order, and I'm sure this has been the case for other, especially Vertigo titles. I'm trying to remember if the Sandman trade paperbacks were that way, but I don't think so. At least not the first original Sandman trade paperbacks that I read. But the fact that you read the first volume and then you get a little bit of extra about how the series started. Then you read the second volume, you get a little bit of extra on how the series started developing. So you get through the extras in chapter by chapter format as you get the various trades or the various deluxe editions. I thought was great. Deluxe edition of Punk Rock Jesus is full of extras, right? So now I'd be like, what kind of extras have we seen that aren't just the things that we've already talked about? So we've talked about covers, we've talked about variant covers, we've talked about sketches, we've talked about character designs and initial designs and things like that. We've talked about proposals, we've talked about script pages, and we've talked about roughs, layouts, and pencils transitioning from script pages. So that's a whole bunch of stuff. But is there any other stuff of extra? Oh, and the caveat for those who have joined later is that when we are talking about extra now we're talking about process extras. So not promotional material, marketing material, so on and so forth, not alternate covers that were published. We don't mean the collection of finished pieces somewhere else. We mean things that inform how that work was made. So after all of these things that we've talked about, what else is there that we may have seen? Yeah, so people are listing that these things have tons of extras. I'd love to know the nature of the extras, if it is something outside of the things that we have already talked about. Do you prefer when extras come at the beginning of the book or at the end of the book? Yeah, I think you'll get almost an anonymous answer, unanimous answer here is I don't think any extra stuff should come before the book. That's my opinion, but I'm guessing that's going to be a lot of other people's opinions. And this is an interesting thing, is that if we are saying all of these deluxe editions with the extras are for people who have already read the book, are for people who have already bought the book, uh, then why? Then why should it matter? Because I'm only double dipping or I'm only buying something that I've already read before. So shouldn't I get the extras first because I'm already familiar with the story, and now I should read the extras and go through this whole thing, and then I should see the final product with fresh eyes that have now come through this forest of extras and is much more experienced and much more sharp. One could definitely say that. I've definitely seen YouTube videos and things like that where they'll show you the entire process and then end with the short film that was made or the ad that they created or the whatever, the photo that they took. And so they'll show you all this stuff. They'll give you a little stinger or a teaser right at the beginning, but that's a completely different medium. It's made for keeping people interested in getting them curious and then giving them a payoff at some point of time. So I don't know. Maybe there's a good argument to be made for the extras coming first, because this is for the collector, this is for the fan who's already read it in some other format, digital or double dipping or otherwise, and now and now get it. And and that's what we saw. For those of you who were at the beginning of the live stream when we started, we saw that that's the way the Pulp process edition is there. The little bit that is the full story is after all of the thing that makes the process edition, which is another reason why the process edition is unique. Um, so I want to know if the book is good before I start to read all the extras. Right. So that's assuming that I'm buying a book or I've got a book in which I haven't read before. So I just happen to have either bought an edition with a lot of extras and or yeah, I mean that's just like my first encounter with the book for sure. It was just I was just relating it to that earlier conversation we were all having about how they're all double dips and they're all for people who are fans anyway. I'm like, in that case, it shouldn't make a difference. But obviously, you're one of those people who would be buying a book, reading it for the first time, and then having extras in it, which is what I really like about trade paperbacks and deluxes having these process extras. And once again, extras can be a whole bunch of everything. So like yeah, so um you've got an extensive history of the creator, so a biography. You might have things, and uh, I'm thinking about books that we've talked about on this channel. The one that really came to mind was I knew the box set wasn't here. Was the Tardi World War One books, particularly "Goddamn This War," which has this entire section of all the photographs and the writing that was part of the research, but the the person involved in that research is almost like a co-author of the book, and that's the way Tardy credits them. So it's difficult to tell, even though that's not the comic anymore and that's not the graphic novel anymore. It's difficult to tell if that is or is not an extra. But also at the beginning of the live stream we were talking about, well, things have to be about the process of creating this work. So I may give you a biography of the author, I may give you a biography of where they were, like anything from the Tintin to the about the author parts of any trade paperback will give you a little bit of biographical information. But is it an insight into the process? Is it an insight into how this was created? And if so, then I'd count it. And if not, I'd count it closer to being one of those general adjacent to this work material that we all love. I mean, or many of us love, and other people couldn't care less about. The idea that I'm talking specifically about things that allow you to understand how one particular work was created, or one particular aspect of that work was created. So something that is a lot more specific than generalized history, generalized context. But of course, the lines are very blurry. So if I have a World War One story, and we did say that inspiration is part of this, then wouldn't this true story be part of the process? Yes, it would be part of that inspiration process. And it would definitely be important, but what more about the process are we looking at? Um, okay, so let's see what else I had in the comments that people had left for me. I had. Okay, so well, first of all, we had Matthew Savino saying, and we were talking about watching the Watchmen, but he was talking about it being a great process book, and he didn't mention Batman Year One. So 3 or 4 people mentioned Batman Year One. That definitely seems to be the big one for many people. But Absolute Arkham Asylum, and again, a lot of Absolute editions and a lot of artist editions, artisan editions, etc., will definitely give us insight into process. One of the All right, so here we have a comment, and now this is something that I would have wanted clarification from the comic board. Good to see you back, comic board. Have your people call my people. Graffiti's wall extra on the process of hand lettering is something that I'll always remember. Lettering in general is often overlooked, but after reading that section, I've paid a lot more attention to it and have searched out how different creators work with it. And that's fantastic. Lettering is indeed something that doesn't get as much attention as it should. It's really one of the undersung things. And when lettering is bad or when it doesn't work, it stands out. Whether or not you're able to identify it, I think more than production quality, I'm able to, and maybe this is a bias, but I'm able to dismiss or at least classify something as really amateur or really getting started and not having understood everything because of the lettering. Like nothing differentiates a comic at first glance to me as much as the not even the art. And I would consider the lettering closer to art than writing. It is definitely art. So I agree with all of that. But the problem that I have is I couldn't remember this thing. So I went to my copy of Graffiti's wall, and I don't have this extra that the comic board is talking about. There isn't any extra over here, and definitely not about lettering, which I would have loved because Aditya Bidekar, who's the letterer of Graffiti's Wall, is an amazing letterer, and I've seen stuff online, but this book doesn't have it. And then I realized that the comic board is probably talking about the Dark Horse edition to this book, and this one that I have is by Unbound. So I think this one is an earlier edition coming out of self-publishing or self Kickstarter funded publishing. So I guess that's an extra that Dark Horse added in their edition of Graffiti's Wall. So it sounds excellent. Unfortunately, not in this edition. So that's too bad. Um, Four words till after. Yes, I don't even want to read blurbs. I do not like spoilers. In fact, if someone says that's science fiction, I'm half like, oh, why didn't you just tell me it was good? Now I've got science fiction expectations, but I've gotten a little better about that. You can't these days you can't be too fussy, I think. But yeah, definitely. But I'm just saying that if I have a special edition, if I have a special for fans collectors editions, how come that still gets put over there? But I do think that it's not only for fans. So there'll be someone like, for example, I know a lot of people who read Parker by Darwin Cook, so talking about this thing, in the Martini edition for the first time in that huge Martini edition, and that's what attracted them to it. And that's astonishing because it came out much later, and those original Parker IDW hardcovers are terrific. I love them. I mean, I did double dip on the Martini editions, but that's me. But that's not the point. The point is that these special luxury deluxe wonderful editions will be reaching new readers as well. So it doesn't make sense to put the extras in front unless you're absolutely sure that the only thing, or the vast majority of people that you're going for. Or it might be a psychological thing where it doesn't matter if I've read the book 100 times before, I still don't want the extras at the beginning of the book. I want them at the end of the book. I wonder why. Um, Usagi Books have extras on his lettering that are really interesting. Yes. And speaking of Usagi, Highland, I'm going to bring one of my favorite books. This is the gallery edition of Usagi Yojimbo, Artist and Other Stories. Now, I have a video on this as well as the first gallery. This is the second gallery edition. I don't think this is even going to fit inside another thing. And all gallery editions or artist editions from Dark Horse IDW, you can think of them as process editions in some way because they replicate the original art, and the original art is an insight into the process. Now, if the original art is super finished and clean, the way Usagi Yojimbo is, you might think, well, I'm not really getting much of a process. I don't see many blue pencils. I don't see any roughs. I don't see anything transition from one to the other. So a process needs to have a journey. So if I only get one particular insight, which is the case of a page and the art of a page, I need to be an expert. I need to understand art in such a level that I can look at that, I can see the brushstroke, and I can create the process for myself. It's almost as if I look at that piece by piece and I put it together. And I'm sure that many people do that and have the ability to do that. I guess I could try to do it, but I don't think I have that kind of art expertise. So I really look upon it as a piece of original art that then got transformed and changed by things like color, shrinking down, making things cleaner, stuff like that. Um, this light. But the reason why I have this particular edition of Usagi Yojimbo is apart from the fact I do not believe I'll be able to get this under the. All right, let's see. All right, so apart from the fact that this has the original art pages of Usagi Yojimbo stories, it has this story, How I Draw Usagi Yojimbo by Stan Sakai, and it's broken into two parts. So the first part of this is in the first gallery edition, and the second part of this is in the second gallery edition. And this itself is a piece that is reproduced from, was it Amazing Heroes? It was a comics journal or magazine in the United States, like Amazing Heroes, in which this first appeared. Now, this is a story, not a story. This is his writing on how he does Usagi Yojimbo, and he's done it Scott McCloud style in the form of a comic. So he explains to you the steps that it takes for him to create this. Now, it's because Stan Sakai is the writer, the artist, the letterer, the inker, everything on Usagi Yojimbo, it's all in his control. This is rather charmingly the original art. It's made to look like the original art of the piece that was published, because of course this is an, it's a gallery edition, so it has original art. So this isn't the final piece that was published. This is the original art of the piece that was published. Very meta narrative. But this is one of my favorite extras because it's a singular creator who has a singular work that I happen to love, talking about the entire beginning to end of doing it. Now, obviously, much more simplified, but he gives you the full steps of the creation of the comic and the end product that he gets to. So this small little piece, reprinted in a number of places, including in these gallery editions, ends up being one of my favorite process pages, or set of process pages, I should say, in the Usagi Yojimbo gallery editions, because of that, because of how comprehensive it is. So getting back to that earlier question of what is the full process, is like there are many steps in it, but if there was a person to explain it to us, it would be a person who does everything in their comic before they send it off to the publisher. And that's what makes Stan Sakai and Usagi Yojimbo such a great example for that. So yeah, I of course had to mention that. Check out that video if you want a closer look at this volume. It's amazing. Um, all right, moving along. I've got only a couple of other books that I wanted to show. It's a good thing because my light is failing. Somebody mentioned in the comments, sorry about that noise. Somebody mentioned in the comments about, well, we had, I think Analog Comics may have mentioned in the comments over here, but he did say, or in this comment, he has to mention Christian Grosset's The Red Star. Books I have contain a lot of material about how the computer graphics were done, and this was interesting. And this sounds interesting to me because it's about computer graphics. Just anything that is different from what we have seen before. I haven't necessarily, although I have something over here that might be a little similar. It's not quite computer graphics, but yes, the using technology, how technology is used in creating one particular story in one particular edition, that is also an interesting part of the process. It doesn't have to be only your art style. It can also be the way that you work. So when I was young, I loved reading about writers' routines. I wake up early in the morning and I write before everyone gets up, or I write late at night when the whole world is sleeping. Like, it almost feels like there's maybe a secret that one can tap into. Of course there isn't, but how differently people can work and what inspires people, but also how they, inspiration is a very fleeting thing. It's like, I was inspired, it seems like it came to you in a flash and then everything is good. It's like, it isn't. It's a long, arduous process of working things out. So I'm really fascinated in that stamina aspect of it, rather than it be like eureka and then I have a piece of art. It's that, how do you make it? How do you do it day after day? So in those kind of terms, I think, we can go from inspiration, we can go to habits and to life and to work. And it's like, oh, I have a little window that looks out over there. All of these things can become part of a process for us. One of the other comments mentioned, oh, wait. Absolute Batman Year One from Hell Companion. Right, so we've got Scented Man says Corto Maltese comics, the early years, and Sea Ballad. So the Ballad of the Salty Sea. Once again, I'm not, and I saw Samuel mention Corto Maltese Spanish editions having extras at the beginning. I don't have any Spanish editions. The only Corto Maltese editions I have are the ones from IDW's Eurobooks. And I looked up the Ballad of the Salty Sea. I didn't remember any extras over there, and I didn't find anything extra. But yes, the early years, which is a, as they say, a graphic novel, which is not an early Corto Maltese story, as I mistakenly said in one of my earlier videos. As I was corrected over there, the early years is obviously a later story. It's just called the early years. It's written as a prequel by Hugo Pratt. And obviously, once you look at the art style and you look at the complexity, etc., you can see that it is a mature work. But the interesting thing over here, and what IDW has gathered over here, is that it was meant to have a sequel. The early years, the novel, was supposed to have a part 2 and a part 3, which Hugo Pratt never completed because he had a falling out with, I think, the publishers, the syndication, or the newspaper publishers. However, many years later, I think in the 2000s, 16 strips, daily strips, were found of a sequel. And this is not a process page in one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is it's definitely something that is rare. This was not even known to have existed, but because these strips were syndicated, there were some newspapers out there that ran this story, which was obviously never completed and never went anywhere. This undiscovered this newly discovered, forgotten sequel, the rediscovered sequel, makes for a fascinating extra to throw in at the end of this book. Now, I do have there are these 3 panels over here that were scanned and then used in the Ballad of the Salty Sea. So I'm not sure if that's what's being referred to in the comment. But while I wouldn't call this an outright process page, it is one of those what may have been. So a possible process page, a process thing that never was, a story that never happened. It's a great thing to have. It's a great thing to have as an extra. It's one of those things that spark the imagination. And the last books that I want to talk about before I actually talk about the main title that the whole thing is built around, Pulp, is Bandette by Tobin and Paul Tobin, and I think they're married, Colin Coover. A series, Colleen Coover, and I've read a number of books by them. I've read one book by them, which is very naughty. It's definitely X-rated, and I didn't expect that. But it's also an Eisner winner, so I'm not really sure how that works. But anyway, this is very G-rated, quite lovely, playful. I'm missing one volume, obviously. Now Very well. I'm going to have to go with this. But this is volume 2, 3, and 4, volume 1, and Bandette, talking about Gore Vidal and others, talking about Audrey Hepburn and Gregory Peck and Roman Holiday. Bandette is, I don't know, do people just think that this is kind of an all-ages children's comic? I mean, it's definitely colorful. It's definitely appealing. This is like a modern-day Blake Edwards movie in some ways. It's Roman Holiday meets the Pink Panther, less pratfalls, maybe a little more smart alecky, but Bandette, the art thief, leads a glamorous double life. It's great, fun storytelling. it's got a real light touch. It's got wonderful art. It's got smart writing. It may not be earth shaking, but I really love this series. And one of the things one of the things that really adds to my enjoyment once I finished it, the extras that we get over here, the designs of the characters, making your references to those movie stars that we were talking about, but also your script, your writing, and then things that I know very little about. And of course, it won't be. I think all of them have extras at the end. All of them have definitely character sketches of the characters who appear, the new characters who appear in in that particular volume and that story. Um, Yeah, this is very irritating because what I wanted to show, I think, is in volume one, which I don't know where I've put. But anyway, what I wanted to show was I didn't know anything about colors, and I didn't know anything about the layering of colors. And as much as I loved and admired these colors, I I didn't I still don't understand digital coloring, but to me I think I've always had this sort of condescension for digital coloring from MS Paint type of things. So like, oh, you just take a little bucket and you click on something and it just fills up with that color, and what's the fun and the joy of that? But in this case, oh, hello. It's by the lamp. Oh, thank you, Ashwita. My wife has just come in to tell me that volume one was by the lamp. Thank you. There we go. All right. So let's now. It'll be really foolish if this does not contain what I thought it contains. So yes, you've got more script. You've got writing bandit. What's bandits? Okay. Drawing bandit. Yes. So here, when we start getting into the art of the lines, of where the blues are, of how the shades come in, of how the grays come in, and then how you do this particular layer, and then how you combine and blend that layer and this layer to make this layer, this to create this thing. This is perhaps one of the simplest, easiest, cleanest, and most effective ways I've seen of getting me to understand. Obviously, not technically, as my recapitulation right now just showed you, but these 4 or 5 pages, this drawing bandette section in volume one, had it again. It's I'm not saying this is the most brilliantly written or done one. I don't know. It just, in my experience, I love this. I love these 5 pages, and then seeing that final image being put together over here in a way that's very different from the way that I see physical painting being done, or coloring and illustration being done. And since then, I've seen many more people show their work on layers and how compositing of those layers creates the effects that they create in the work, which is something that I never thought I would enjoy, but I've enjoyed quite a lot. So yes, Bandette by Tobin and Coover. I do recommend this series, but this is some of my personal favorite, just like that Usagi Yojimbo, some of my personal favorite extras, just from the way. Yes, when in doubt, walk into the set and point it out. Thank you very much. But just like Usagi Yojimbo, these are illustrated for me things in a way that I found fresh, unique, and stuck. Which is I think the whole point of it. All right, so all of that brings us finally to Pulp. How are we doing on time? Bah, nothing. It's nothing. So once again, Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips, Pulp, the Process Edition, slightly oversized from its original, and you can tell that this is the Process Edition because half of the cover is the final cover with all of the colors, and half of the cover is just in line work. Pretty interesting, pretty cool. A lot of different things exist in this book, and I'll go through them. And as I said, I'll try not. I won't give any spoilers as far as the story is concerned. I do want to note something that is pointed out in this book. The first thing that they're working on is the logo, and they know. All right, okay. So one tiny spoiler, because this was kind of something that this is a noir western, is what I knew about it. The tiniest spoiler is it's not all set in the Wild West. That's about the most I'll say. Some of it is set in New York City 40 years later. So that's important because I'd seen this logo a number of times. I'd seen Pulp in this format, and I just kind of seen it as a Western thing. And of course, that Western font is purposefully there as a motif for the Wild West. But because it also intersects with something later and modern, there is there's PULP written inside this PULP. And of course, I can always see the lines, but I just never registered the fact that this is a much more modern sans serif font overlaying on top of this, heavy serifed old West style font. This right here is actually telling you that this is two different layers in this story, one back in the Wild West and one a more modern one. It's just a cool thing. I hadn't noticed it, I hadn't realized it, and I like the extras pointing it out. Now, whenever I see it, I see not only the Western font, but I definitely see the more modern one inside it. Before, I don't know what I thought it was, like maybe just a three-dimensional kind of thing. But the process edition, compared to what we've been talking about, does the strange and unique perhaps thing of starting with not just an introduction. That's pretty natural. It just starts with the process and you're into it. So there's writing, and then there's the cover. Interestingly, the cover, and this is something that Brubaker Phillips fans may know, the cover gets made first. Covers get made first, and sometimes made not only before there are any interior art pages, but also sometimes before page scripts are written. There's something I did not know. And they like to use the cover to sort of guide the story as well, which I thought was fascinating because I always thought a cover comes last. Of course, I shouldn't be surprised from, but if it was in the golden age or something and we were talking about that advertising, I could see, but I find it difficult to figure out how a cover, but obviously when you're looking at a cover like this, it's not beyond the realm of reason to be able to make a cover like this before you've got the story. But it was an interesting thing. And like the Sandman, like Watchmen that we saw, and like Ex Machina, the writing starts with a proposal, but not a proposal to a publisher, a proposal to each other, because the way they work is when they're approaching the end of one project that they're collaborating on, when it's almost done, Brubaker starts thinking about the next thing they could work on. And then he talks to Sean Phillips, and then Sean Phillips replies and says things like, I hope there are not going to be any superheroes in it, something like that. And they go back and forth. And Sean Phillips said something, and he said, I want to do a Western. Now, he does say that last time Sean Phillips said, I want to do a romance story, the story they ended up with was My Heroes Have Always Been Junkies, which I guess can be classified as a romance. So it's the same thing with Pulp. Is like he said, Sean Phillips says, I want to do a Western, and this is what Brubaker comes up with. And Brubaker says, well, I hope it's close enough. It's the best I could do. It's the closest I could come to, just the way that My Heroes Have Always Been Junkies was the closest I could come to a romance. So wonderful stuff over there. Then we get into the cover pages. Then we look at how the cover itself is put together and the different layers making this. And then it goes on. The trailer. The trailer is something that Brubaker and Phillips do for their books, and they take this idea from movies. So Brubaker writes over here that he's never understood why releasing a cover or releasing the first few pages of a story is the way to do marketing. And he says the first few pages don't tell you anything about the tone. They don't tell you about what the thing. And what he likes are movie trailers. And so what he creates before, and this is also very interesting, before he writes the script, he writes a trailer script. And then the trailer is sketched out, laid out, thumbnailed, etc. And once that is done, then you end up with this thing that looks like this, like a comics page. But the interesting thing is, if you read the book, these panels do appear in the book, but in different sequences. They appear at different times of the story, and they're being stitched together over here to create this trailer, going with coming in May, a new original graphic. So very much like a movie trailer, but unlike a movie trailer, these scenes that are being put in here have not actually been written into a book yet. So it's not like the footage from an edited movie being cut to make a trailer. The trailer has been thumbnailed, written out, and sketched first, and later you have to see how much of this trailer actually showed up in the book. Now, in my cursory glances through this, they're all very accurate for the most. There are a couple of lines of dialogue. Obviously, they don't occur in this format, but this is something that was done before the story was written, and then this was used in the story, which I found to be a weird and fascinating, like, backward process. So all three of the trailers that they created are in here. Then you've got the next part of the process. And this, just to recap what I showed at the beginning of the live stream, there we go. This is the book, as in, this is Pulp right here. And this is the rest of the book. So all those questions remain. Can we say extras when this is the book and this is what comes? Can we say extras when this comes before the story? And if it's called the process edition, the whole idea that this book exists in order to demonstrate the process that created this work. Now, maybe this work is the only work that can really take something like this, because this is a much slimmer book than most American comics are, even graphic novels. This is, I think it's exactly 64 pages, or it's very close to 64 pages, which makes it the size of a Tintin album or an Asterix album. It's that thin, but it's in a nice hardcover format. And again, this is something that Brubaker talks about how they wanted to make graphic novels like that. But what you do get after these trailers, and then you get the thumbnails, of every page. Once the book has been scripted, every single breakdown is included over here for all 64 pages. And of course, these are the things that you can then compare the layouts to. But once the layouts are put in here, then we will get into the pencils. So all 64-page rough layouts preceding the pencils, and then the pencils side by side to the script. So the same thing that we saw in Batman Year One, and the same thing that we've seen for the first issue of Watchmen or the first issue of the Sandman. But Batman Year One had the full thing, and that again is a small little thin story. But here we've got, in the process edition, the full book with the script and the page. And unlike the Batman Year One, which had 4 pages being gridded, this is every page in its page size. So obviously, because you're only getting it on the recto side and the verso side has the script, you're going to have double the length of the full story, with some of the lettering in there, with the writing in there. And this is it in blue pencils, the full story script, every single page, every single panel replicated for you. After you've already seen their breakdowns, now you see each page coming up again. So definitely something we've seen before in other things, but at this level of comprehensiveness, at this level of detail, and at this level of production, because this is where you can see this, instead of having the script quartered on a page. Instead of having just a section, you can see the entire pacing and the editing of this book coming together, starting from the proposal, starting from the conversation, through all of these the thumbnails, and then into the pages. Just superb, magnificent stuff. I think just reading the script itself is something that's very interesting for me, but definitely comparing the pencils to the final pages, comparing the pencils to the script to the final pages, maybe even going to the trailers and saying, oh, he doesn't say bang in the book, does he? Stuff like that is great. And one thing that I did notice over here, and I didn't find anything in the book explaining this to me, is there are pages like this. Now, at first glance, I thought this was, and maybe that's because of the mouse guard video that I made recently last week, that had the black and white edition with those pages of vellum that were overlays over the inked art, and then you had weather effects on it, and so therefore the rain was separate from the figures and it didn't muddy up the art. And that was something that people really liked looking at. And when I first, I was like, whoa, is this the same thing? Is this vellum? But no, it's just reproduced in this way. So it looks like tracing paper. And there's, I think, one more or a couple more pages just like that, which have that sort of tracing paper vellum look to it, in which it seems like there's the movie theater scene, but now, of course, I will not be able to find it. And I'm getting to the end of so no spoilers, but anyway, this is the only example I can find right now. But you can see it looks like there's tracing paper on top of art, and then there are blue lines adding more art. And then there is another scene in which they're in a movie theater and they happen to be in this form, and then you've got blue art filling in the lines. You know what? This is a live stream. I'm gonna have to find it because that's the whole point. There we go. I'm close to it. There we go. So this page over here, I'm not quite sure of what it's showing me, but obviously there was a page with art that was finalized, and then there is another page that is filling in details or is replacing things. I wish there was some sort of note, but I'll go back over this, and maybe there'll be some. Oh, I don't know if this is focused. I just realized. Yeah, there we. So I'm not quite sure if anyone knows what this is. What this is referring to, but the combination of these full-sized art pages next to the script. Analog comics, I think you're saying easier to digest than just written script pages. I agree. I think written script pages are appealing to some people and will always be appealing to some people, but written script pages next to their pages in pencils, or even the layouts and the roughs, but particularly when you've got more finished inks. I mean, you always have the absolute finished product to look at. So if you give me script pages next to the script to the final page, that's great. But I've often seen script pages have things that are deviated from in the art, maybe sometimes just small details. So because we like to see, oh, look, he described how the handle of the gun should look at his hip and he did it in this way, what a cool interpretation, or I wouldn't have thought of it that way. We're looking for things like that, but we'll also see, oh, he decided not to have the door on the left, or there must have been some reason why he made that person wear a hat when it says, he doesn't wear a hat. Those are the kind of questions you can, be as academic or as curious as you want to be. But as an edition that tells you about how a comic was made, especially a comic that is, as I said earlier, is a completely worthwhile read. It's a terrific story. It feels still in some ways, and it's got depth. It's about a number of different things, but it's definitely more complex than it lets on, because it seems to be a very lean and direct story. And I think the complexity of it, like with many great things, is just slightly below the surface and another level below the surface. And I think what this process edition allows us to do is to kind of delve a little deeper to understand that in a different way. Now, if you loved Pulp, you may say that I don't need any of this, or you may equally say I have to find out how this is. If you didn't like Pulp, you might still be intrigued by what is behind it, and the thing that I thought was shallow, or the thing that I thought was throwaway, is it really? Because look at how many times they refer to it. I think these are things that these kind of editions bring up for us. Now, they're not for everyone, and I completely understand. And I think at some point of time, I would definitely have been one of those people who's like, I don't want to know any context. I don't want to know anything outside of anything. I only want the work of art. That is the only thing that matters. As I've gotten older, that's become in my own mind. I find that a little foolish to be that stringent on because I don't believe that art just comes out of nowhere. And the more I encounter that idea, the more irritated I find myself with it. So therefore, that sort of excavation and the investigation has become more and more appealing to me, and it really helps for me. It really helps with my appreciation of stuff, especially when it's mind-boggling, or especially when I have no idea how that came to be. It doesn't demystify things for me. Actually, it makes me more admiring. It makes me see how much work has gone into putting something layer by layer, that you can't just wing it. You can't just throw something against a wall and say, oh, that's going to be great. You've got to engineer it. I think that part of it is far from being demystifying. It's quite inspiring, and that's why I think all of it is like, even process stuff is just fascinating to me. I often joke that I would be able to make a channel on YouTube in which I would upload more frequently with process problems as far as making videos is concerned. And earlier I think off my shelf was saying is, I was like, no, lean is like as little equipment as possible. And I completely understand that. But there's just something so interesting to say that, oh, if I put this on top of that and then dial that one back by 5 and add it, I get a completely different effect, and having that curiosity, I think books like this, they'll definitely get you thinking about these things if you're interested in that part of it. So yeah, I thought this was a great edition. I thought this was a great book. I thought it was a very good story, but I thought this edition in particular, as I said, it might not be something you can do with every book, but I love seeing where the journey starts. Talking about the full process, I like seeing how someone is inspired and how someone comes up with some idea, what research they do, what they find out, what they must put in there. When you hear a story, you're like, oh, I'm going to put that in my story, but how do I work that in? All of these kind of things, I think, would be things that we would be interested in, but we seek them out. There'll be interviews, there'll be YouTube channels, there'll be magazine articles. There are a lot of different ways that we can find information about things we like and get more details. But this all in one volume, in which, yes, you can go online and you can go find other books and you can find ancillary supporting material. But this idea of having everything in one volume, of course, it's not going to be everything, but having things in one volume where I've got the work and I've got the context and the process of it, at least in a little way shown to me, I think is a fantastic thing. I would love for all books to have these kind of things in them. Trade paperbacks, as I said. I don't think they should be only for deluxe hardcover editions, but I understand that there are cost questions. You can't just keep adding pages to something, and if people don't want them, if people aren't interested in them, then they don't want to pay that extra amount of money to have things that they didn't ask for. So there's always going to be, I think, a lean edition and a stuff with extras edition. If we can get some sort of clarity on what's coming in the future, we may not double dip as much as we do. But yeah, I can understand why people don't want to let you know, because now they're not going to buy the trade paperback because everyone's waiting for the deluxe. So I'm not, I'm not sure what the business of publishing wants to do, but as a reader and as a lay reader, I'm not an artist and I'm not a writer. So as a lay reader, for me, I find this stuff absolutely fascinating. All right. Yes. Greep Rim says, when you see all the work that goes into something like that, it makes me admire the right. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And I think that's one thing that I'd mentioned before also and had come up in the comments. The fact that you can not care for a story and still admire the creators and the effort and the work that went into it. I think those two things being separate is an interesting experience. I've not always been a person who's been that way, but today I find myself appreciating things in some ways and not in other ways, and I can do that more and more. And I think that's fine. I think that is good, nuanced. Like, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to be absolutist. You can have a variety of different reasons, and some reasons can be on the good side and the positive side, and some other reasons can be on the negative, and they can coexist. So I absolutely agree with that. Is that having that admiration for the work and the effort is separate, I think, to a certain extent. I know some people have said to me when I said I didn't like that, and they say, well, it took 500 years to make that, and or it took 5 years to make that, and they developed this new technology for doing. And I say, well, that's great, but I still didn't like the movie. So I don't think that's a reason why you should like a movie or a book. I don't think the effort or the craft that goes into it should be the excuse or the rationale for other things not being that good. That's not what I'm saying, but I do think that they can exist separately, and I think that they can coexist and have both in there, which is why I really like these things. Most of them are for things I absolutely love, but they make me also realize that something I didn't love might have a similar process, might have a similar approach to it. So just like when working on YouTube, the more I learn about light and audio and the more mind boggling it gets, the more I realize that even the worst movie I've seen, has had some audio technicians and some cinematography experts working on certain things, maybe with a limited budget, but even the worst thing I've seen has had people working at a professional level at things. Um, that's that I think is all that I really bring to this. Um, Sleepy Reader says that some creators such as Brubaker and Phillips must like us to understand their work. Maybe other creators would like to maintain the mystery of their craft. That's true. I mean, it depends on whether, you think. I think most creators would like to talk about their craft, but they don't want to talk about it with everyone. So I think that's what happens, because anyone who works at things, they want to share it, but not only with the audience. They want to share it with people who will be critical. They want to share it with people who will workshop things with them. They'll also share it with people who understand why, which is where I come from as well. Is like, whenever I start talking about YouTube stuff, my wife's eyes just glaze over. It's just like, I just want to talk to someone about like depth of field or something like that, or how to get these cables to not make this buzzing noise, and like, how do you set this light? Like, even an amateur like me, even someone just starting out, gets so excited about things and wants to talk about things with people that I think that unless we're saying that someone thinks that this is my trade secret and I don't want anyone else to know it, because then they'll rip me off or they'll start doing the same thing. I think, yeah, there'll probably be some people who have like secret techniques and stuff like that. And I also think that, yes, some of these materials are very curated. So they're not letting you see the full picture because uh, they want to leave some mystery about it, or there really is no way to give you every single piece. um, at the same time, I don't think that every single person who would want to share it would be given an opportunity, either by their publishers or by their readers or by the particular scenario they're in. And that's why I think things like people's Instagram accounts and other social media things have taken on that role, where you can follow your favorite creator and you can see their process. You can see them work on something. You can see them discuss one particular problem that they faced. You can see them ask questions and crowdsource responses and things like that. They're separated from the text and they're more about that particular creator. And I know that that's just getting better and more access and more visibility every day. So I think people are being more open because now they have an opportunity to be more open. But that single book, it's the same thing with the Tintin things, is that at a point of time before the internet, uh, these books, like the Tintin Companion, etc., they were precious because they collated things into one volume. Now, all of this information can be found online, and today you can find a lot of these references if you go out and hunt. But someone having gone through that, someone having curated it, and someone having streamlined it for consumption as a distinct, discrete book in itself, gave that, I think, package a different identity than the more nebulous browsing, finding, searching uh, thing that we know of today. It seems to have a lot more focus and direction, and of course, led by some other editorial plan. But I think it's there in some form or the other. And I like it because I don't go out hunting on social media too much, because I don't follow too many people and things like that. I like it to be delivered to me in this one volume that also contains the actual story that this process thing is about. So for me, that works out as a preference because it seems to, in a curated way, concisely put something together. I love interviews by creators, but there's just, like I'll have to go out and find them, and there's so many of them, and then I'll have to listen to all of them, and then there'll be gems in them. But all I want is I want to take a little bit of that, I want to take a little bit of this, and I want to put together a clip show for people. I guess that's the editorial side of me. But that's what these books to me are. It's not. Um, it's not necessarily something you wouldn't find, but it's something so specifically geared. Like, I loved Pulp, so I want to find out about Pulp. I loved Sandman, so I want to know more about Sandman. That's one of those reasons why I'm not talking about something generalist like how to draw comics, how to write comics, but how was this particular issue of Astro City written? What was the thought process that went behind it? And I'm coming from after having read that, after having been blown away by that story. I'm like, how do you come up with this stuff? Or how do you put it together? Or what made you think of this? And then you get some things that are trivia and some things that are creative, and it's blended in so nicely. But I like having it in the same volume that I have that Astro City story. And it's that convenience for me. Sleepy Reader says, have seen how Tintin was made did break the illusion of perfect line art a bit. Yeah, I remember when I first saw Chris Ware's sketches, and I thought that's scary. And then, speaking of interviews, there's a great interview, I think, with Chris Ware, Joe Sacco, both of them being interviewed by someone at a convention, and then Joe Sacco and Chris Ware just start talking to each other, and Sacco says, "Yeah, I always put this, and I want to sign my name because I want people to know I touched the piece of paper. I want to put my mark on it, even if it's an imperfection." Or something like that. I'm paraphrasing wildly. And Chris Ware says, "Oh, that's interesting, because I always try to go in the opposite direction where I try to make the artist like not exist. Like, my drawings, I want them to look like typographical reproductions." And it's just like, yeah, that's the effect. But at the end of the day, it's not a typographical reproduction. Someone sat and drew a circle and put a line through it and did that. And then they ended up making that. So it's like that same idea, is that the effort is to erase the lines, the effort is to remove the strings, and yeah, I think for some people it's like a removal of the mystery. For me, it's the heightening of it. Is like that is something that looks like something I could do, that looks like something I could never do. Like, how do you get that to be that? And you're like, because you go in this process. That to me is like, it makes it more admirable to me. I think I stopped thinking about that magic thing, as I was saying earlier. I guess I'm just repeating myself. But it is, at this point of time, almost 1 a.m., which is not bad for a live stream. I would say this is not the longest live stream I've ever had by any means, but it's not one of those little piddly short ones. But tomorrow is a work day, so I suppose I shall have to pack it in. Although now I'm just like wired, and I've got all these comics around here, and I'm just like, maybe I should read Pulp one more time. But yeah, I think I'll sign off for right now. I am going to have to catch up on this conversation later and come back to these comments, because I think I just missed a whole bunch of them. But I always really enjoy the live chat, and I always, come back and go through the live chat and scroll up and down really fast to see if I missed something interesting. And in the past I have answered questions that people asked me and I missed, but I found them, and I found another comment by them on my channel and did that. So in case I missed anything that you wanted to ask me, please leave it in the comments. Otherwise, I'll go through the chat at some point of time over the next couple of days. Thank you very much for being here. It was great seeing everyone. Fantastic conversation. I hope you enjoyed this live stream. There'll be plenty more. I like this system of like having 3 videos on a live stream or 4 videos on a live stream. I think if I'm able to, I'll that's the way I'll try to do it. But yeah, thank you very much for joining me. This has been For the Love of Comics.